Hello everyone, and welcome to another loosely scripted supplemental. Now, as many of you may know, my feature-length retrospective review on Star Trek Deep Space Nine is due out at the end of this week, so stay tuned for that. But before that, I wanted to talk about the excellent What We Left Behind, the crowd-funded Deep Space Nine documentary, which came out a few years back. If you're a DS9 fan, or a fan of Star Trek in general, and you haven't seen this, please change that. I myself have only recently seen this documentary for my retrospective review, but just up front I'll say I highly recommend this. I think this is a really great documentary. I will say though, something which kind of threw me a little bit when I first watched this is that this documentary is not a beat-by-beat chronicling of the making of the show. The actual behind-the-scenes events in terms of production and coming up with the stories is kept mostly to a minimum. If you're looking for that, honestly, my retrospective is probably going to be better for that, but what this documentary is much more interested in are the personal reflections of the cast and crew, as well as a general celebration of the fans of the show and DS9's legacy on the wider TV landscape and the Star Trek franchise. Now, this can lead to a bit of a messy feeling structure at first, but once you settle into the rhythm of it, this is a terrific watch. Seeing all those longtime friends and colleagues reuniting and sharing a laugh as they reminisce about the show is just delightful, really. And the documentary is clever in the way that it switches between single interviews and group interviews. As the film makes clear from the start, people's memories of events from so many years ago aren't always super reliable, and so by intercutting with these group interviews, we get some fun debates and different accounts of how certain things happened. This leads to some really brilliant anecdotes from everyone, and the way they talk to one another is just endlessly enjoyable. It's basically like watching a big family. Sure, they squabble and they disagree, but ultimately they all clearly love each other. Although, that's not always true when it comes to the cast and certain Paramount executives. Something I really like about the documentary is that it's really honest about when things weren't always sunshine and roses. As I've been researching for my Deep Space Nine retrospective, I've always consulted this documentary for personal perspectives over the official interviews on the DS9 DVDs, which tend to avoid the more touchy subjects, whereas in What We Leave Behind, the cast and crew freely discuss when there were big arguments behind the scenes. For example, Terry Farrell is much more open about why she left the show and how she felt mistreated by certain people at Paramount. That honesty further extends to Ira Steven Behr's reflections on the series as well. A recurring segment which I love is when the cast read out fan mail at the time, which basically do nothing but shit all over the series. While it wasn't the same type of backlash as was discussed in Chaos on the Bridge, again, it's something I find endlessly amusing after reading the modern day backlash new Star Trek shows often get, and just how similar their criticisms are. For me though, easily the best and most honest point Behr makes is when he discusses the show's handling of LGBTQ+ representation. I think it's extremely mature of Behr to say he thinks they could have made more of an effort in some places, but at the same time, the documentary leaves that particular topic of discussion open to the viewer. For me though, easily my favourite thread in the documentary is Behr reuniting the DS9 writing team and them mapping out a hypothetical first episode for Deep Space Nine Season 8. Just seeing these incredibly talented writers bounce ideas off each other and generate new stories is incredible. As some of you may know, I have my experience writing my own fiction, and so this was really quite inspiring to watch and made me want to instantly do a bit more writing myself. At the same time, the actual episode they end up creating is so good. I do wonder if Behr included this segment in the vague hopes of actually getting it made. In reality, probably not, but the documentary did go to the effort of remastering the original DS9 footage in the real hope that CBS would actually do it, seeing an incentive. So who knows? And yes, CBS, please do a Blu-ray release of Deep Space Nine. I'd kill for it. As I mentioned previously though, the structure of this film is pretty odd. It can feel quite scattershot at times. It's pretty clear the team essentially shot a shitload of interviews, chronicled all these stories, and then tried to figure out how they could fit it all together, as opposed to going into the project with the intention of telling a particular story. So while the remastered space battle from Sacrifice of Angels is amazing looking, it is just sort of plonked in the middle of a random interview. That being said, Bear does acknowledge this at the end in a segment with Nana Visitor, in which he talks about the stuff they wanted to include in the film but unfortunately couldn't find a place for and so on. The result is the same, but again, that honesty goes a long way for me. And I think what I ultimately love about the documentary is that, just like with Chaos on the Bridge, it isn't pretentious in its coverage of Star Trek. It's quite self-aware and even a bit irreverent. But that irreverence never gets in the way of the more moving stories from the various interview subjects. All in all, it comes across as a real celebration of every aspect of the show. Those who were part of making it, the ordeal of actually getting it made, and the legacy of the show in the Star Trek fanbase and for pop culture at large. Honestly, I think I'm probably pretty late to the game with this one, but if you're a Trekkie or a DS9 fan specifically, and you haven't seen this one, it's really worth checking out. Just like with Chaos on the Bridge, I highly, highly recommend it. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.